that time, so I will call the regular meeting of the Kent Board of Selectmen to order on October 1st, 2019 at a little bit after 4:30. And ask everyone to please stand and join us as we salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to make a motion to move two items that are down under new business up to the top. That's assuming that Attorney Sinkowitz gets here shortly, because we're paying him a decent amount of money to be here. I'd like to move him up to the top so we can have him do his thing and go and get off the payroll as soon as possible. So.
Does that mean just the opposite, those who are volunteers, sorry?
Under new business D, the Kent sewer plant land lease, it's a convenient one. I propose to move that one up, along with the one that really is the reason for the move, and that is Jeff is here to do a short presentation on the rule changes that have occurred in the federal level regarding the criteria for federal tribal recognition. So, motion to move D and G up to the top, or towards the top, and we'll move on, and then we'll stop where we are and go to wherever Jeff arrives. So can I get a second on that? Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, so that's up top. So in the meantime, we have one set of minutes from our regular meeting of August 6th. We haven't met since that time, having not been able to get everybody together here in September. So I move to approve the minutes of August 6th, 2019 as submitted. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay. Public communication. We have a few written. Is there any oral communications being anything that is not already on this agenda? If you don't have an agenda, please help yourself. I would remind everybody, in case there is any oral comment, we are and have been for a number of years broadcasting this meeting and all selectmen's meetings live on YouTube. So if you are going to comment, please speak up. The microphone is not a real powerful one. And try to remember to just identify yourself as the speaker, because the camera faces here. You won't have to be on camera if you're standing back there, but your voice will be heard by the people gathering. So, having said that, is there any oral communication at this time? Okay, moving forward, I have some written communication. The first one, the monthly staff report from Land Use Administrator Donna Hayes. Donna's usually with us, but she's away at this time on vacation. Any questions on Donna's report? You should have it in your packet.
Not I.
Okay. She's back, I believe, on the after Columbus Day. Columbus Day is the 14th. She's back in the office on the 15th. Hi, Jeff. Welcome. We're just taking care of some quick business, and we've moved you up to the top, so if you like, you can sit right there. Okay. Also, there's Leah Polaro Social Services Report. I think Leah is here.
Yep, I'm here.
Leah, is there anything that you specifically would like to comment on this report?
No, I think it's pretty direct.
Okay, speaks for itself. Any questions there? Okay. And then we have a letter that was written a couple of months ago, actually, and the writer has asked that it not be read. A change of mind for reasons of the writer's own. So that letter, you have it, but it will not be read publicly. That's all I have for written communications. So Jeff, what we've done here is there's two items that there's one you know you're here to speak on, and we thought we'd get you, since you're here, to speak on the other as well. So one is the Kent Sewer Plant land lease, which is in this.
Okay.
Okay, you can speak to it, however briefly you think is necessary. And then the other is the reason that more people are here is the tribal recognition issue.
Okay.
So why don't you do the land lease explanation for people who have no idea what we're talking about.
You want me
Or I can-
to face the crowd a little bit?
Sure. This is Jeff Sinkowitz, by the way, attorney from New Milford. He was our town attorney for many years, and I'm proud to say that we made the wise decision when we changed town attorneys to retain his services for all things related to tribal recognition. So that's why he's, main reason he's here today. But he's also the attorney for the Kent Sewer Commission, and is very knowledgeable in both of those areas.
To make a long story short on the sewer,
Your email's in there.
the, okay. The town leased, the land where the sewer plant is located from the Kent School in 1970. And it was a 50-year lease, and basically, we're not paying any rent. And then over the years, there were some, not so much modifications to the lease, but there were additional easements that are tied to the lease, if I recall correctly. One was a groundwater monitoring easement from 1998, and one was a pump station easement. There was a pump station expansion, and so the sewer commission needed some additional land for that. And both of those easements are from the Kent School, and both of those easements basically would be extended if you exercise your option to extend the pump station or the sewer treatment plant lease. The groundwater monitoring allows the town to monitor the waters from the sewer plant to the river, and basically, I believe, if I recall correctly, prohibits Kent School from using those groundwaters because the theory is they're impacted by septic waste. So that lease is expiring. It was a 50-year lease. That lease is expiring, and I had looked at it and recommended to the Board of Selectmen that they exercise their option to extend that lease for an additional 50 years. And I can't remember what the exercise date was. It's, you got some time, but you might as well do it.
Yeah, they have the motion here.
Yeah.
It's crafted by you, correct?
I think so, yeah. So basically what you need to do though, is you need to exercise the option, and then either you or me or Randy has to send a letter to the Kent School telling them that we've exercised the option.
Okay.
And, because I think I had suggested that Randy put something on the land records to reflect that we had exercised the option.
Okay.
So I mean, I think it's something that you should do sooner or rather than later, so you don't forget about it and then lose the option.
Is there a time limit on the option?
Yeah, you have to do it,
I mean,
you're in,
is there a window?
yeah, the window's closing.
Windows till
yeah.
October 2020?
Jeff, I have information. It's 6 months, has to be exercised
Before-
6 months
6 months
prior to
before,
the
yeah,
expiration
yeah,
of the
yeah.
lease, which is
Right.
October 6, 2020.
Okay.
That's the lease expiration date. So
But-
6 months before that, we put it April 5th.
Okay, but you should exercise it because it's just an accident waiting to happen.
Sure.
If you don't, I mean, theoretically, you could have exercised it on day one, 50 years, or 49 years ago. But,
Okay.
okay,
That was my question.
so,
And this is with the blessings of the sewer commission,
Yes.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah.
and if you exercise the option and you don't need, I mean, and you know, for some reason, you don't need the sewer plant anymore there, you close it up and walk away. I mean, you're not paying rent, or it's not costing you anything.
And there are no additional provisos with the extension?
No,
So
this
it's
is,
the same as it was
Same
50 years ago?
yeah,
and-
yeah, yeah.
So,
Just,
Oh, I'm sorry.
another comment?
No, I'm just saying, it's just that we have to notify them, that's all, that's, you know.
And just thinking as I do, is there any reason to try to negotiate more land, more space? Do we need something? Is is this an opportunity at the time of the lease to say, yes, we want to extend, but we would also like to?
I don't know if there's more land to be able to lease from them out in that area.
Uh-huh.
It's not to say that there might not be other land, I'm just, where we are right now, it's pretty much maxed out, because the rest is wetlands out there.
I don't think we need more land.
No? Okay.
I mean, at the moment, I think we're fine,
All right.
but, you know,
I mean, in the trend of where septic, sewage plants are heading or not heading, is there any technology that makes it expand or contract?
no,
Okay.
no.
My sense is that if it's just like we needed the groundwater monitoring easement, the state mandated that at some point. We were able to negotiate with them for that. There was a pump station expansion, I can't remember the reasons, all the ins and outs, but they were, we were able to negotiate for that. We may have paid them something, but it was pretty insignificant, by the grand scheme of
But
things.
Kent School is our biggest
Yeah.
user,
Yeah.
right,
Yes.
of the system.
Clearly,
So
makes
I mean,
sense.
they need the sewer plant, I think, to some degree, as much as we need their land to have it there.
Exactly.
And I think that was the rationale for the lease there to begin with.
Sure, makes sense.
So, if you're ready to take some action on this today, there's a motion here.
Appreciate it, reason not to.
Attorney Sinkowitz. I move that the town of Kent exercise its option to extend the October 6, 1970 lease with Kent School Corporation for land for the town sewer plant for an additional period of 50 years from October 5th, 2020, and that such exercise of the option include the groundwater monitoring easement dated December 17th, 1998, and the pump station easement dated August 19th, 2011. The town attorney is directed to send written notice to the Kent School Corporation notifying the school that the town is exercising its right to extend the lease on the same terms and conditions as contained in the original lease for the additional period of 50 years, and further directing the town attorney to prepare a document for recording on the land records evidencing that the town has exercised its right to extend the lease and related easements for such additional 50-year period.
Second.
Further discussion?
And just so that, does that last clause mean that 50 years from now, this board can have the right to extend again for another
No.
50 years?
No.
Is there anything in the lease that allows, so if we are extending this lease, that option,
Right.
does that mean that the lease as it is, meaning with another 50-year period comes along with it or not?
No.
No, so we have 50 years and then it's
I mean,
theoretically.
theory, you can argue about that at the time, but my interpretation of the lease is you get a one-year option to renew the lease on the same terms and conditions. A one-shot 50-year deal.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank
And commission
Thank
too
you.
for.
So you're gonna have Randy do that, or you want me to do that?
I was gonna suggest when you were talking about before, that you and Randy perhaps work together on this. That,
Okay.
that you could, send-
I'll draft something, send it to
Right.
him. Okay,
Right.
all right.
I think that would be the best. I mean, I'm happy to take the lead on it if it's necessary. It would be better to have you.
All right, okay, all right. I don't think.
Okay, the real reason I asked Jeff to come today is because the issue of federal tribal recognition has, as I use the term, reared its ugly head again. We were hoping, we knew it wasn't completely done over with when we prevailed in a battle, the same battle a few years back. But we thought we were in pretty good shape, and we are. But word has it that the SIT, which is one of the two factions of the Scaticog tribe, is planning to petition again for tribal recognition. So in an effort to be proactive, I've been to Hartford along with Jeff and along with Kent School's attorney and Kent School's financial manager and two local residents who led the charge last time, and probably some other people that I'm leaving out. And we met with the governor's office and the attorney general's office, a number of people in Hartford, in the capital, to sort of pull everybody together, town, school, and state, in terms of fighting this, but also in terms of funding it. A great deal of money was spent last last time by all three of those entities, and a great deal of money will need to be spent this time if it does proceed. I've asked Jeff to come here, even though I've answered questions at committee meetings and selectmen's meetings and publicly, and feel pretty knowledgeable about it, but I've asked Jeff to come here just so everybody who wanted to, whether you be sitting here now or listening from your home, can hear from our expert. I have great, as I said earlier, a great deal of confidence in Jeff and his knowledge in this topic going back well over 20 years.
It's been a long time.
Long time, been a long time, what good way to put it, so. Could you take a little bit of time, Jeff, and fill everybody in, and then maybe answer some questions
I
if there
can
are some?
try. My involvement with the Scottico pretty much started with a land claims case filed by the Scottico tribal nation against the town and a number of landowners, the most prominent of which was the Kent School Corporation. And in that case, they were claiming all of this property on the theory that it had been conveyed in violation of the non-intercourse provisions of the United States Constitution. And the non-intercourse provision basically says that no one can deal with Indians other than the federal government. So they were claiming that all the conveyances over 250 years or so were void. Through some pretrial conferences, the matter got, the question of whether the group qualified as a federal tribe was sent to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And over a period of years, their evidence was reviewed, and ultimately was decided that they did not meet the requirements to be a federally recognized Indian tribe. In those days, Laurie Schiesel was the first selectman, and there was a board. And when we were first starting out our review, our posture was, if the Scotticokes qualify, then so be it. That's the name of the game. They're entitled to their recognition. But if the evidence does not establish that they qualify, then indeed it's important for the town to not to have them recognized as a federal tribe because of the implications of that to the town of Kent. Well, very early on, when we started to review the materials that they had submitted to the BIA, we found that their own experts felt that they did not qualify and did not meet the requirements for a variety of reasons. And so we became a little bit more, well, if their own people don't think they qualify, we better look at this pretty hard. So, to make a long story short, the issue of whether they qualified as a federal tribe percolated for many, many years through the administrative agency. Initially, they were found not on what they call a preliminary decision. They were told you don't qualify, and a whole list of reasons were given. They were given an opportunity to try to address those reasons, which they did. We felt that they still didn't qualify, but there was something called what's called a final decision, which really isn't a final decision. But it said they did qualify. We took an appeal to the Interior Board of Indian Review, and as soon as, and almost, no, not immediately, but one of the issues that we raised, the BIA almost immediately said, we agree we made a mistake on this issue, we have to get it back and look at it again. But there were other issues, and ultimately the Interior Board of Indian Appeals reversed the final determination and remanded it back to the BIA. And then the BIA eventually took some more, there was a lot of stuff going on, depositions, all kinds of claims made by the Indians. But eventually, in what's called a reconsidered final determination, it was determined that they were not an Indian tribe, and this is a Schaghticoke tribal nation. And then the Schaghticoke tribal nation took an appeal to the courts, and they lost at the district court level, and they then took an appeal of that decision to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and they lost that appeal. In the meanwhile, while all that was going on, the Schaghticoke Indian tribe, which is really the Kent-based group, they they claimed that the petition that the Schaghticoke tribal nation was using was really the Schaghticoke Indian tribe petition, that the Schaghticoke tribal nation had sort of appropriated a lot of their evidence and records and documents, and that they were the real Schaghticoke Indian tribe. And then eventually they attempted to file a documented petition and asked that the BIA review both the STM petition and the SIT petition at the same time, simultaneously. And the BIA decided not to do that. So their petition was left hanging, not acted on. They had a number of what are called technical reviews of their documents, of their petition, and they seemed unable to respond to those technical review letters. They would submit information, but it was, the staff at the BIA never found it sufficient to get them to what's called a documented petition for review. So when the litigation ended with the STN recognition proceedings at the administrative level, at the BIA, there was still this outstanding land use case. And eventually, I thought they would withdraw the case because they were not recognized as an Indian tribe. They chose not to withdraw the case. We filed, I can't remember if it was motions to dismiss or motions for summary judgment, probably motions for summary judgment. We filed motions. Ultimately, the court threw the case out, granted judgment in favor of the town, and the Schaghticoke tribal nation took that up on appeal. And that went to the district, Second Circuit Court of Appeals, where again it was the dismissal of the case was affirmed. I can't remember if it was 2014 or 2015. The Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs decided he wanted to modify and amend the regulations that govern Indian recognition, or Indian tribal recognition. And the BIA proposed new regulations, which we responded to. When I said we, the town of Kent, on behalf of the town of Kent, I filed comments and objections, if you will. Other parties filed comments and objections, all across the country. Tribes and non-tribes were commenting on this. And ultimately, the BIA adopted new regulations, I think in 2015, well maybe I have them right here. 2015, new recognition regulations.
And that was towards the end of the Obama administration, right?
Yeah, it was the Obama administration's people that were doing it. At some point after those regulations were adopted, groups like the Schaghticoke Indian tribe could either finalize their what they had previously submitted to get it to the point where it was a documented petition, or not. And eventually, one of the letters that was written back to the SIT, I interpreted as the BIA saying, we're done. We're not treating this we're not gonna consider this any further. And that was maybe only a couple of years ago. And so I think it was in June, there was an article in the newspaper with Alan Russell and several other people involved, I think their business person, indicating that they expected to file a new petition under the new regulations in the immediate future. And we learned that they had actually filed something earlier that we had not been aware of, and that had been rejected as being in somewhat of improper form. And so they were basically invited to resubmit, to revise their documentation and resubmit. And in the press release, or the press article, the news article, they did indicate that they were planning to resubmit at an early date. We thought July is what the article said, and that they still intended to pursue a variety of items, including land claims against I don't know against whom, but against presumably other landowners. And so we then, I think I sent that article onto Bruce, and we started to chat about it. The article was seen by others, and they started to chat about it. And so we were able to get our hands on the letter of denial, or the letter of rejection, and we were able to get our hands on a slightly redacted version of the petition that had been rejected, the newest petition that had been rejected. None of the supporting information, though. I mean, we were lucky to get our hands on what we got, because they're so bad on FOI compliance. And we've basically really just tried to be ready for when they finally do submit their final document, which theoretically could be tomorrow. And the big problem from our standpoint is that, well, I got a number of problems from our standpoint, but the big problem from my standpoint is that the window to comment is very limited. It's only 120 days. And what's supposed to happen is their petition and their supporting documentation is supposed to be in a form that it can be posted on the BIA website. And rather than make FOI requests and that sort of thing, we should be able to go onto the website and figure out what their claims are and provide comments on their petition. We only get one, under the new rules, we only get one shot to comment, and that's in that 120-day period. And the regulations are less onerous for the tribes to, for example, and I don't know exactly how it's going to play out in the final scheme of things. In the old regulations, they had to prove tribal existence from the period of first sustained contact, which for our purposes are probably in the 1730s thereabouts, maybe 17, depending on how you define it, but 1730s probably. And in the new regulations, they only have to prove tribal existence from 1900. One of the unanswered questions is that the BIA already decided that as of 1900, for big periods of time in the 1800s, the Schaghticoke did not meet the requirements for tribal existence because they didn't have evidence of political authority or of community, or sufficient evidence. And how they'll look at it under the new regulations, the state of Connecticut has always sort of recognized the existence of Scottico tribe, depending, but they haven't, but it's been more like, it's more of an issue of dissent, not an issue of political activity. And whether they meet that requirement in 1900, I mean, that's an issue that we're gonna have to raise. You know, the existence of a state reservation is one criteria or one factor that the BIA can look at under the new regs.
But that was not part of the old regs.
Right, correct. Although there was a big, that was a huge issue in the prior case. Because there was a state reservation, and the BIA said, well, that's enough to, where you don't have any evidence, that's enough. And, we basically said, well, that's not, the fact that there's a reservation doesn't mean anything in terms of political authority or community. You know, one of the things that came into the regulations that's favorable for us is the issue of splinter groups. And basically, the regulations say that they're not gonna recognize splinter groups, but this SIT claims that they're not a splinter group, that they're the true tribe. They've always claimed that. And that the STN was the splinter group. So how the BIA look at that, I don't know. So, you know, the lawyers have been talking, we actually had a conference call today about it. We're sort of gearing up and trying to prepare ourselves for what to expect. I mean, I think the fact that we got their petition already, their earlier petition has been rejected, you know, it gives us a clue of what to expect. A lot of the arguments that they're making have been made before, but whether those will end up in their final petition, I don't know. They seem to rely on a book that was published by a woman named Lucian Lavin. Oh, I'm not sure is that a woman, Lucian? Maybe by a person named Lucian Lavin. And another person who I think was the STN genealogist. But Lucian Lavin was one of the experts in the STN. So, you know, how much, well, I guess we'll have to see what they finally submit and what's before the BIA. Actually, it's the Office of Federal Acknowledgement in the BIA, but we'll have to see. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you.
Jeff, generally, in terms of the nature of their claims,
Yeah.
if they were granted full recognition,
Right.
what's the worst case for the town?
It's hard to imagine the worst case. I mean, you have, well, you have all this talk about casinos. I mean, it's been, all the time it's been talked about, all these years. There was a time when the STN said, oh, we want a casino, but we want it in Bridgeport or Danbury or somewhere else. And then the regulations seem to, the regulations for offsite casinos seem to change. And by the time we were finishing up with the case against the STN, I interpreted the regulations as saying you cannot have off-reservation casinos, so that would push the casino back here. But then they can take land they can take land somewhere else theoretically and make it part of the reservation. So, you know, they could, you know, there's no regulation once it's an Indian federally recognized tribe. No hold barred, so to speak. I think the Mashantuckets have taken huge amounts of land beyond what was their original reservation into their reservation with the federal government's approval. The government's philosophy is that the tribes they're independent. The theory is that they're independent nations, and the call them, I think the technical word is dependent Indian nations. But they're considered independent nations with their own government, their own rules. And the dependent part is where the United States is supposed to protect them and enhance them and help lift them out of poverty or whatever condition they find themselves in. You know, when a group starts off saying, we wanna take all this land without regard to who's there, I mean, how do you react to that? Now, this SIT, I don't think has quite said that now, they have said that in the past. But if they get federal, even if they don't start off with land claims like they have in the past, and the first land claim litigation was filed in the early 1970s. I was right out of law school, and the Indians in Kent were filing a land claim. And it's that one eventually got dismissed without prejudice after many years. But it's been going on since the 70s, so what's that, almost 50 years?
Sure.
So it's important that they not be recognized, just to put an end to it, and to get some stability, I think, for the town, and, you know, deal with the reservation as a state reservation. But I don't know, you know, it's hard for me to anticipate, you know, the STN, I think, would still like to be recognized. They haven't given up, they keep making moves and noises. They still are claiming that they're entitled to a casino, even though they're not federally recognized. You know, who knows, it's, you know, it's hard to
Is
say.
the land claim from the two groups essentially the same? I mean, the scope of
Well,
the land?
it was essentially the same, yeah.
The land claims, I've seen.
I thought they were identical, yeah.
I've seen varying maps of the land claims,
Yeah.
and some of them are huge.
Well, there was,
Go up to
there was,
Massachusetts and far out in New York State, and.
it's kind of interesting, there have been some cases. And right now, there is a case that the STN has filed, where the STN is claiming $600 million from the state of Connecticut, claiming that the land around the reservation was improperly sold, and that they were entitled to a accounting of those funds. Part of that case, part of that case, they basically said that the STN basically said that the Schaghticoke Indians own the land on the west side of the river, that had been improperly sold by the state, and I think they were claiming damages for that, plus the 600 million was what they valued, what the state received from the sales in today's dollars. And was always my argument that the Schaghticoke historically never owned the land on the west side of the river. That it really was at time of first sustained contact, it was the Mohican Indians that were there. And everybody was afraid to go across the river because everyone was afraid of the Mohicans. And, but then I think they died out of disease, probably smallpox, who knows, I don't know, pneumonia. All of a sudden they were gone at about the time that the Indians down in Milford sold New Milford to the Milford proprietors. And the Indians sort of trickled up here and settled on it. They all of a sudden, this nice land on the other side of the river. Well, the court, in this case that was brought, rejected the Schaghticoke tribal nation's claim of ownership of the land. And then the judge did something a little bit odd. I think he threw out their threw out their claim to a trust account, to the 600 million, but almost immediately he reconsidered and vacated his decision, so that's, I think, still, that was only within the last few months. So the Scottico Tribal Nation, even though they haven't been federally recognized, they're still bringing lawsuits. There have been some court cases in which, the court has said that what the state has recognized is the Scottico Indians, and that neither the Scottico Indian tribe nor the Scottico Tribal Nation represent what the state recognizes as Scottico Indians.
And it's interesting to note that when, on occasion that I need some assistance,
Yeah.
whether it be verbal or otherwise, from the state, when I call them, they say, we don't really want anything to do with them until we know who their leadership is, and we don't know that right now.
Well, then there was a third case that was brought by the SIT to evict a person who was, to evict one of the residents of the reservation. And that went before the judge in Litchfield, and there were three groups were claiming to be the Scottico Indians. And the judge kind of said, I'm not deciding I'm not deciding any of these groups. I mean, the groups all use the same, pretty much the same stationery. You know, it's like you can print it up. It's like everybody in town started calling themselves the town of Kent, and using your stationery. They just have different stationery, different board, different, chairman or chief, and they all look exactly the same, pretty much.
And their tribal roles are similar as well.
Yeah, but the problem is we don't really get good access to the tribal rolls, because that's considered, question of privacy information. So it's a little bit, we can ferret out who's on the tribal rolls, and I have some access to some of the stuff from the old case, to try to figure out who the SIT is supposed to be. But even that is a little bit unclear, so, and those are issues we're gonna have to deal with when we have to respond to this, petition.
Any other questions from here before I offer? Anybody in the audience have a question of Jeff?
Yes, ma'am.
Casino aside,
Yeah.
let's assume that it's not economic, what is the risk, the most aggressive thing that could happen that would be harmful to us?
They could acquire additional lands, and do what they wanna do.
One example that was given to me in the previous fight in which I went to Washington DC, one example, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I'm correct, is that, for example, they could obtain ownership of our recently renovated gas station and sell tax-free cigarettes.
To sell tax-free
Because they are a
gasoline.
sovereign nation, they do not have to abide by the laws of Kent or the laws of Connecticut.
The lease for the sewer would be null and void.
And that's timely because the part of the land claim is definitely the land that the sewer plant is on, without question.
Would they have to purchase it, or would they just make claim with it?
They would have to purchase it.
Well, the gas station they'd have to purchase, the sewer plant, to the extent that they claim is part of their,
That would
Well, I
go,
mean, the
Indigenous
additional lands
Yeah.
that you're talking about, they would have to purchase.
some, and
Some.
not.
Some
It's part
maybe.
of their claim already. The treatment plant is part of it.
I know, much of Kent School is it.
Kent School's campus.
they wanted, their claim, basically, I actually always, no one ever said it so much, I always kind of thought reading between the lines. They wanted the Kent School, because that's right, you can start the casino right, boom, just like that. You know, you got rooms for people to stay in. No, it doesn't cost you anything. If the court says this is tribal land, they basically eject the Kent School. Now, I don't think that's gonna, as a practical matter, is that really gonna happen? I don't know.
Lynn, did that answer your question?
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it up to, if they submit an application,
Yeah.
is it up to the people to be watching the BIA website, or is there
Well,
mandatory notification that
No,
comes
it
to
gets
them?
published, it gets published in the Federal Register, which I don't read, to be honest with you. But the governor's office I believe that the rules said the governor's office, the attorney general's office, and that talks about the county government, which I don't, so I don't know if we'll get notice of that or not, or they'll go to, you know, I'm not sure who,
County.
yeah, I'm not sure where that is, county courthouse.
And Kent School has spent a large sum of money.
The Kent School has a lawyer down in Washington, and he's gonna be closer to the BIA to monitor it. But whether we actually get notice or not, I don't know. It does get published in the Federal Register, but, you know, a lot of stuff gets published in the Federal Register none of us ever see.
Catherine Backrack, during previous incidents of this, the governor's office and Dick Blumenthal were very involved.
Yes,
Do you anticipate that Governor Lamont and the current Attorney General will be as involved?
yes,
Yeah, we met with them in Hartford, and it appeared, I would say, I would agree with Jeff,
Yeah.
emphatically, yes.
we, the last time we were involved, when the land claims, when the lawsuit was filed against us and Kent School and everybody else, I turned out to be the lead attorney for a while. And, because the state was not involved in it. And it took, and so, you know, I was stalling for time with the, with the federal judge. But eventually, because there were no land claims against the state, it was just against everybody, you know, all the moms and pops in the school and us. Eventually, the Attorney General, which was Dick Blumenthal, became involved, and they moved to intervene in the proceedings. And that was granted. And then they became not so much involved in the litigation, but perhaps more involved in the BIA proceedings. But we were all involved. We had a sort of a consortium of defense attorneys, which was the Attorney General, myself, CLMP, and Kent School, the lawyers that were involved for the land, some of the landowners. So we kind of worked together on a lot of that.
And the Attorney General that took over from Dick Blumenthal, George Jepson, was also very involved. I went to his office and met with him.
I mean, the Attorney General's office was very involved in the comments for the new regulations, as were the Congress people, as was the Connecticut delegation. To be honest with you, I think the pressure that was put on the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs by the congressional delegation, maybe even directly to President Obama, I don't know, they're all Democrats, I think was kind of benefited us in the final version of the regulations. Because I think that the fellow who was the Assistant Secretary was very, very recognize everybody, you know. So it was very, we've had great support at the state level and with our congressional delegation.
And I can tell you that we have great support from our locals in that, just by coincidence, I'm the chairman presently of our Council of Governments, known as the COG. 21 towns, most of the towns of Litchfield County. And when I brought this to their attention, when it first cropped up again 3 or 4 months ago, they were all very quick to offer the letters of support, whatever we would need from surrounding towns. So that's out there as well.
You know, what I would say though, is that, and my approach to this is always been, if they meet the requirements, they meet the requirements. You know, that's a fact of life. But they don't meet the requirements. What's really happened is they probably functioned as a tribe before 1800. Was kind of, the history is kind of interesting. There really were the Christian Indians, a small group of Christian Indians, and the non-Christian Indians. The Christian Indians, because of the church, were more coalesced before 1800. And the non-Christian Indians seemed to all go north. They all disappeared. And it was really the small group that was left, which is what started this tribe that we now call, this group that we are now calling themselves a tribe. But the tribe has to be a political and social entity. It can't just be a couple people living on a reservation and doing things individually. So it's like a country, I guess Czechoslovakia is no more. The Czechs 20 years from now, and the Slovaks may say, well, we want another Czechoslovakia. But it's been missing for all these years. They've had separate countries. So that's what happened, I think, to the Scattercook is they dispersed. Historically, they dispersed. They didn't do anything for long periods of time. I think there was really no action taken from like 1802, no concerted action from like 1802 to 1875 or 78. A huge period of time where nothing happened. And the BIA basically looked at every shred of documents and said, there's no evidence of community and there's no evidence of political authority. Political authority means you gotta have leaders and followers. Every once in a while something happens, they do something, and one can say, well, but once it's dead, it's dead. You can't. It's like trying to breathe life back into a cadaver. You can't do it. Under the law. So that's the big problem. But the problem is they do have claims. They do have pretty much by descent. They are descendants of what I would consider the Scattercook Indians from back in the before 1800. So they have descent, but that doesn't mean they're a nation. That's the question.
Jeff,
Yeah.
you mentioned before 1900, but if the rules changed to 1900, is it your opinion there's a political entity since 1900?
No.
Okay.
There's probably a political, there's a,
Political, cultural.
there was still huge gaps in their evidence. It's kind of interesting. Everyone thought they were Pequots up until recently, up until they started reviewing the evidence. But in the 60s they started to organize. Somebody started to look. There were people on the state rolls who were basically allowed. I think that there was a blood quota, Indian blood quota, and anybody who was an Indian could live there if you met the blood quota. Not many did. And so the state had records of people who were, quote, Scattercook. And I think it was about the mid-60s, they started to try to get together as a group. And, but the big problem, even for those people, the big problem is, starting in the 1980s, there's this huge rift between let's assume all those people were a tribe that met all of the requirements from historical times to the present. By the late 80s, or mid-80s, and certainly the BIA made a finding as a 95, they were not a group. That was one of the reasons that the SDN didn't get approved was because they did represent the Scattercook Indians, historical tribe. Whether they'll make a different finding for the SIT is another story. Now, keep in mind that the STN is always lobbying to try to push back and they haven't gone away. They still want to be recognized as a federal tribe. If they can get the regulations changed, they'll do it, I think. It's very important to them. And I think it's very important to the SIT, but I think it's equally important to the town, not to get hoodwinked into having a federally recognized tribe in your midst.
Okay, we have a big agenda still to go. Any last comments or questions before I thank Jeff?
How much money do we have still left? Is it
About 28,000.
28,000?
28.
Some are estimating that it could end up costing.
That's
us
what's
100.
been appropriated.
I've
We
already,
appropriated 200,000 last time, or 250, what was it?
No, I don't remember.
We did it, it was 200?
it's been suggested that we'd be talking in the neighborhood, at least for starters, of 100, and I've already spoken to the Board of Finance on that topic.
I mean, we've sort of lined up some consultants to look at the evidence when it comes in. And,
Right now, the firm in Washington is covering the bills, but eventually it's gonna be dispersed between Kent School, us, and State of Connecticut.
I'll have to come to you. I think it would be something I'd want to discuss with you, maybe more in executive session,
Right.
Okay.
sort of the strategy.
Jeff, thank you very, very much for
No
your
problem.
knowledge and your time. Much
Thank you.
appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll excuse Jeff because he's on the payroll, but anybody else who wants to join him, I will excuse you and not be offended if you do.
Are you on the payroll?
Okay, thank you. Moving onward, new business, A, CHRI, which is acronym for Criminal History Record Information. There's a piece in the packet for it. I've asked, since this came from Joyce, I'd asked Joyce if she would speak to it just briefly. Would you mind doing so?
I can't take as much time as Jeff.
No, we're not saying
Okay, because we do fingerprints for pistol permits, the state police have done an audit, and it's not just Kent, it's a lot of entities within the state. They've put together a package for us to follow for our IT department and for the way that we handle the fingerprints and the information that we receive. So part of the audit was that we need to approve this procedure in order to handle that information. They're asking for the Board of Selectmen to do that.
I was reading through this, trying to figure out what was the intent of this.
That's what the intent, I'm sorry.
Got it now?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
I did the same.
Crystallizes it very well.
Okay, so what would the proper wording be, Joyce? I move to endorse, accept,
You're approving this procedure.
approve the criminal CHRI document assuring proper access, use, and dissemination procedures. That's enough.
Second that.
Discussion?
Yeah, I was reading it too, and it's a question of directly how it impacts us. I guess it's a procedure and a policy that has to be adhered to in town with any applicable records. So it should become part of the policy manual.
Good.
I think it should be.
Probably should be.
Although, I mean,
Yeah.
Well, somebody's gonna be overseeing it, and maybe multiple people, correct?
Primarily the Selectmen's office, we're the ones who get that information, so.
this is clearly a policy that the town,
At least if it gets put in there, it doesn't get buried in the file cabinet somewhere.
it's not just another miscellaneous policy. If it's in the policy manual, it's the place where presumably we go to see our policies.
Okay, I would expand my motion a little bit and recommend that it be included in the policy and procedure.
I second that.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Joyce, for your work on that. Appreciate it. Okay, the Kent Center School Ball Field Subcommittee, interesting developments here. Try and keep it brief. This was a committee that was created in 2007 after a resident came and brought to our attention, I was then a selectman, brought to the attention of the Board of Selectmen that the playing fields at Kent Center School were in deplorable condition, which they were, except for the baseball field that I coached on. Everything was in deplorable condition. And so the town, some of you may recall, the town approved and spent $30,000 to refurbish the fields under the direction of then superintendent of the Bulls Bridge Golf Club, Ron Giampetro. We followed his suggestions, and it worked exactly as he guaranteed they would. And a subcommittee was created to oversee that, of which I was a member. And since about 2010 or 11, the subcommittee has basically been me. We have a $6,000 line item in the town budget entitled Kent Center School Playing Fields. And it probably would have continued as that, except the recent development is that the Kent School, who owns the fields, another lease thing like we were talking about before with the sewer plant, they're leased to the town of Kent for $1 and have been for many, many years. And they have, for all the time I've been here and before, they have also treated the turf as a part of their turf management program that they do to their playing fields on the other side of the river. As with everything, prices continue to escalate, and this year they decided, without any warning, they decided that, man, we can't do that anymore, so we got a couple of bills. And I called over to Kent School to find out what was up, and that's exactly it. They couldn't absorb the cost of it any further. So I've called and spoken to the company that they deal with, gotten the total cost that it would cost us now that we'll have to go on our own. It's around $3,500 for a year. But the purpose of today's line in the agenda is to, first of all, disband the barely existing but originally created Kent Center School Ball Field Subcommittee, and then to set the ball in motion to recreate a new one, not names of people, but we feel that a good formula would be a representative of the Board of Selectmen, a representative of Kent Center School, and a representative of the Park and Rec Commission. And the Park and Rec Commission Director Leslie Ferris and I met with the principal of the school the other day, and we all agreed that that seemed like a good formula. So again, no names for right now, but that would be the proposed makeup of the committee moving forward. Prompted in part also, but with my departure. So, question?
Could you elaborate a little bit on what property we're talking about?
We're talking about all of the playing fields at Kent Center School, from the school to the river to, not out to Route 7, but along the, what used to be cornfields, and then all the way out to the far reaches of the Mullen area. There's,
So they lease that from the town?
for $1.
Town
We
leases it.
lease that from Kent
The
School.
town leases it from Kent
The
School?
town leases it from Kent School. Kent School owns those fields.
They own the
They own the.
center school field,
Yes.
the whole thing, right to the
All,
end of
the
the.
3 baseball fields,
Yeah,
all soccer fields, and some bordering properties.
So basically, the Board of Ed wants the town to maintain the fields?
No, the Board of Ed had nothing to do with this. This was the line item that's in the town budget and has been there since since 2007 for $6,000. You guys cut it by 1,000, so it needed to be down to 5 now. Covers the cost of clay for the baseball infields, opening up the
Okay, well,
fields in the spring.
what is the cost, what are the expenses that you say it's not the Board of Ed, then who is it that's,
The Board of Ed,
what expenses are we talking about? I guess I'm really not clear on that.
we're talking about the present line item of $6,000 plus an additional, I don't have the.
$3,500.
Roughly 3,500, I can give you an exact one. No, I can't. Plus an additional roughly $3,500 to cover the cost that Kent School previously had covered as a part of their program.
Oh, so it's Kent School?
Kent School.
Okay, that's probably what confused me. Kent School had been supporting the maintenance of the fields.
Correct.
And now they're not anymore.
Correct. And it's worth noting that around the time of the beginning of this process that I just described, Rick voluntarily took on the mowing of the field. So those fields are mowed by the Kent Highway Department. They used to be mowed for most of my teaching career. They were mowed by the school. They are not anymore.
By what school?
By Kent Center School.
Then why are they not moved by Kent Center School?
They were not, the poor mowing practices was a part of the reason for the poor turf that we had there that started this whole thing. And
saw that as well, and he offered to take on the mowing and purchase a machine to do it properly, and purchase the machine in the town budget that served the dual purpose. It's also a machine that clears the sidewalks in the winter. So the town itself has a pretty good stake in the maintenance of these fields, whereas there's nothing in the school budget for it.
Well, it's budget, but you're also talking about oversight.
Yeah,
I mean, if they had continued to make the fields as if, or to the degree that you would consider top grade, it would have been in their budget and they would have done it, correct? I mean, you took it over because they were failing.
yeah, they were very
And they were
important.
failing in part, not just center
2007.
school, but there was no investment in it from the center school
By
to
the
the
center
degree that.
school or by the other user of the field, Kent Park and Rec.
So my
Neither one took
my
it.
question is, and my instincts say that while it's great that your group took it over and rejuvenated it and brought it back, I just think, especially Park and Rec's going through this, study to see how they're gonna handle park and recreation here in town, this is right under their auspices. I don't understand why the selectmen have a subcommittee to run a piece of property that Park and Rec primarily uses and the center school primarily uses. I mean, they should be taking care of our parking lot then, you're sort of switching things around. So I would say that it would be a great opportunity now that Park and Recreation is digging down into all of their, all their uses and their total purview of what they do, to maybe incorporate this as well.
I think that's a good thought, but I don't understand either why the Kent Center School can't maintain the property. They're the primary users.
Not true, not true.
It's joint,
It's jointly used by Park and Rec and the school, and I don't think either one of them are a primary. They're used about equally, less and less all the time. I mean, for example, we pay a good deal of money to a professional company to open up the 3 infields in, say, late April, depending upon weather, and once school is over, they don't get used at all.
Well,
Because there's no ongoing summer use
There's
programs.
no center school softball team any longer.
There's no softball team either, and there's no
And-
Park and Rec softball.
And there's no
either.
Park and Rec, so nobody's using those fields.
Well, not much.
Well-
After June 1st, they're not being
Yes.
used.
So my point is, maybe they shouldn't be a softball field down there. Maybe there should just be one rec field. I don't know, I'm just saying that's something that maybe Park and Rec should look at.
just FYI, Park and Rec does use that quote-unquote softball field.
I'm not suggesting you get rid of it, what I'm simply
Yeah.
saying is an opportunity for you to look at it and recommend whether we get rid of it or not,
No, we
based
do
on
use
usage.
it, we do use it,
But
yeah. And there are often some Saturdays when we have one game on one field and one game on the other,
So,
so just FYI.
based on your usage and based on that history, why don't you guys, why isn't it under your umbrella?
I think the Board of Selectmen took it over to have oversight of it, it's town property that's leased,
Well, I
so-
understand that, but the logic was they took it over because it was purported neglect.
Yeah, because our volunteer base fell apart, yes.
Okay, so I guess going back to Park and Recreation, it makes sense to me for you guys to take a look at that and figure out, A, if you're gonna use it, how much you're gonna use it, and how much money we need to spend on it. And I don't know if there's, really needs to be a Kent Center School Ball Field Maintenance Committee, per se.
I hate to agree with Chris so much, but I think that's spot on. It's a Park and Rec, Park and Rec is reevaluating a lot of the Park and Rec issues in town, including issues such as demographic changes, and I think that should be under their purview to study. If it has to come back to us and there's a need for another subcommittee, so be it, but it seems pretty clear based on the discussion here that that's the place for it to go.
Any thoughts, Leslie, on that?
I guess my only other question would be, are we involving the school at all? We getting any input from
Schools
them,
should
or?
definitely be involved.
I would say that that's under your scope. Once you guys look at it and say, we use it only part-time, but there's another group that uses it part-time, then we're gonna have to see if you can partner, or, I mean, all the money's coming out of the same place.
Yeah, exactly.
Us.
That's
It's
right.
really who maintains it and who keeps it up so that Bruce doesn't have to say, 10 years from now, let's get another committee. to take over these fields.
Probably won't be Bruce though.
Might be.
Well, step one, I think it's appropriate, I think, to disband the prior committee that now is a one-person committee.
Is that a motion?
I move we disband the
Second.
former subcommittee.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So, also make, why don't you make the motion, it was your great idea, to, put it under the purview of Park and Rec.
Does that need a motion? Why do we need a motion for that?
Yeah, it does, because right now it's hanging out there, it's nobody's responsibility.
Yeah, so nobody's, and that's,
So-
that's a recipe
Yes.
for turning the fields back to what they were back in pre-2007.
All right, well, we still have money in the till, correct?
We have,
In this budget. How much money is left in money? Sorry.
I don't know.
I know you don't.
It's just-
I will say
That's a
that
bad
as part of
question.
my report,
Yeah.
I had pointed out that that particular line will go over because of the additional activity in its, what was it, assuming control of the organic lawn care program, that's what it was called. And I was as confused as you, because I put that it was the previous responsibility of KCS, so I have to
Definitely.
correct my own report, and it was the previous responsibility of that school. But
Well,
I don't know exactly, I expect it to go over about like $2,500, give or take.
so yes, there's money in it right now, I don't know how much.
So I make a motion that Park and Recreation take over the responsibilities in their review process of the Kent Center School ball fields. And also take over the funding line of expenditures for said Kent Center School ball fields until the end of the fiscal year.
Second.
Time to dance, everybody.
Unless I don't mean to keep putting you on the spot, do you have any comment on that motion?
I will give it to the commission, I'm sure that if they have a question, you'll hear from them, so I
Okay.
can't speak for them, so,
All right. Okay.
thank you though.
So motion made, seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And I'll be happy to work with you on that if that's.
Thanks.
Okay. C, the Kent Village Housing for the Elderly Abatement. You may recall, we worked on this a while ago. We finally have an agreement. And the lawyers, our lawyer and their lawyer have worked together on it. And it's an agreement that we all can work with.
Look like what we agreed on.
Yep, it is. Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Let's see. Sewer plant lease we did. Social services assistant. Leah has, if you recall, we have in the budget some funding for an assistant in social services. And Leah has put together a subcommittee and she describes the process here and she has a recommended candidate. Leah, you still here? Yes. Would you want to speak to said candidate at all, or?
Well, she was an excellent candidate, both in terms of her ability to do the work that is currently in place, and also someone good to add to the town hall as a whole in social services moving forward.
Can I just ask how many applicants you got and how many interviewed?
I think we had
Roughly.
7 altogether. It's right in there. We called, we actually called 3 candidates. It's
yeah.
right there,
Yep, yep,
okay?
yep, thank you.
For interview, and then explains what the response of those 3 candidates was.
Okay, and the interviews were conducted by, I don't need names of people, that people.
The committee.
Committee was created much the same way we worked with the highway hire.
Exactly.
Okay, I would move to approve Lisa Hoadley as our new social services assistant.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Just a comment, a question. So we had a recent hire under the town crew. I'd just like to make sure that the same steps on their hiring on the back end with administration stays the same. just to be consistent.
Yeah, that's
So what was
exactly.
it, what was the requirement you had? Or one of the questions you had for,
It's the E-Verify that Jeff
The
is so,
E-Verify,
Joe
yeah.
is fond of.
just so there's consistency,
But Bruce, your motion is not complete.
Sorry.
has to be with money.
To start July 1, 2019, that's not happening. It's in the letter. What more do I need in here?
Money?
Oh, it's in the,
Yeah.
it's in the, okay. The suggested hourly rate of $16 per hour, 90-day review, which leaves the potential of an increase, assuming successful evaluation of $18 per hour. And just so I can put it in, and it's incorrect here, when would person start? Yeah, put it
As
in.
soon as they're available,
As soon as available.
the
Okay.
sooner the better.
Okay. Good. Got all that, Joyce?
Yes, okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you, Leah, well done. All right, we have an odd one here for F, a lien on property at 14 Birchville Lane. This was a piece of property, we had a similar one the last year before, in which some money was lent to people many years ago, and the records don't indicate how much said money was for. We do have a copy of the general assistance lien. They're now considering, at least talking about selling the home, and would just like the lien to be lifted. The amount of money,
We tried to find it, we all did, a
Right.
bunch of different departments did different research, we looked back through minutes, we looked back through every town record we could find. We called people who signed the document to see if anybody remembered how much the dollar amount was. Couldn't get any.
Recipient,
this dates,
Recipient is
this
passed.
dates back to 1991, so thank you for trying, but general belief is the amount is relatively low.
Who lent the money?
The town did. I mean, I wouldn't be here.
Is that a customary procedure?
Not now.
no, you can't go along.
Now it's not. This is the second one like this we've had. And the same thing happened. There was nobody that knew anything about it, and the records didn't show. I think records are much better now than
Jeff,
they were.
Jeff, some towns, when they were in the early stages of developing social services, the town leader themselves served as like the social service or welfare agent. So it wouldn't be unusual back further for someone, a select person or someone to make those kind of decisions.
Okay.
So I would move to remove, what would be the proper term?
Release.
Release, yeah, good, release, general assistance lien from volume 97, page 836 of the town records. Immediately.
I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you all.
G we already took care of, so we're down to old business, streetscape. We have a recommendation here, you should have it in front of you. I think I have a copy.
It's been slightly revised since what
Slightly revised.
I emailed out last time.
That one.
No.
I have copies here.
That'd be great.
John Johnson is the chairman of the Streetscape Committee. He's accompanied by some members of Streetscape Committee 1 who are here today, but also Streetscape Committee 2, Wes Wyrick in the back, Mike Gobble in the back. Who am I missing? Who else am I missing here? I guess that's good for the committee
Mike.
presence.
Mike was here.
He's still here.
He's here.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Also, not present but on the committee, Jack Nelson, Lee Sadler. Yeah. And they met many, many, many times,
Yeah.
weekly, or extended period. And they have a recommendation as they were charged. You know,
You wanna talk about TAP first, or
Well,
it fits into this?
It fits in, okay, I'll just briefly touch on the fact that some additional funding has potentially become available through our COG. It's only given to the two rural COGs. One is ours, the Northwest Hills COG, and the other is our sort of related COG in the northeastern corner, Northeast COG. It's federal money that's available just through the COGs. And it's gone unused for a while because it has to be a fairly good-sized project. And so in our COG, there were two submissions this year. One was ours, and the other was a bridge replacement in Torrington. And nobody liked doing it, but at the last COG meeting, and John came in and helped me present, both us and Torrington had to do a presentation of our projects, and they had to be ranked by the members present. Nobody wanted to do that, but they did. The DOT required it, and so they did by secret ballot, they did rank them. And Kent did win out. That doesn't mean that Torrington doesn't have a shot, but when it's sent in for final approval, it will be noted that the COG voted and that Kent came out ranked ahead of Torrington in the final vote. And that's to do some work that had been, for the most part, outside of the area that Streetscape Committee 1 had talked about and that Streetscape Committee 2 had talked about for a portion of their existence. The most notable of which is sidewalks on Lane Street, of which there are none now. Also sidewalks all the way to Stewart Farms Apartments, of which there are some, but they stopped long before getting to Maple Street Extension, home of Stewart Farms. And then sidewalks down Route 7 South on both sides. Connecticut, on both sides of Route 7, down to South Commons driveway and to the Kent Greenhouse.
Just above Kent.
Just above the Kent Greenhouse. I
Is
think
this
one
recommendation? I
okay.
don't remember what's in the application.
One of the things that I think truly won the day for us in the ranking was that most of what I've just described connects to affordable housing. It connects the Stewart Farms in all its phases to the town. It connects Templeton by going right by it. It connects South Commons, and that was, I think, pretty compelling for the people that voted on it. I mean, nobody spoke to it, but I'm guessing that was maybe what put us over the top. Is that good?
Yes.
Well, and what's the potential amount of the grant?
The total value of, I believe, this round of grants is, I think, maybe that's $3 million. Probably to be divided up at least twice, but a decent amount of money that could do a lot, if not all, of what I just described. And and it's also worth noting that it's federal funds, and it was because it's through our COG executive director, Rick Lynn, came down here and met with us. He put the application together for us. We added some photos and general comments. He urged us to keep it separate from the existing project that we've been discussing for a number of years, because the addition of federal funding complicates everything. Just ask Rick and he'll tell you that you jump through 100 more hoops than you have to do. You have to jump through.
Does the grant include any requirement for town participation in that particular grant?
This is called TAP funding, just so you know. Does it require town? Yes, and we've got that matched through the grants and so forth that we've already got. I think that's what I think we're good with town match. Yes.
Okay, you think we're good?
Yeah, that doesn't,
So the amount of money we've already put aside, which I think is $100,000.
correct.
We have 100,000 in our capital plan. We have
So, so that will qualify for whatever the town contribution is under this new potential grant from the COG.
Yes.
No.
No.
They consider our bond resolution town money as well, because that eventually is town money. That's how it gets paid for. So the $100,000 isn't the town participation piece.
They're not even included?
Well, it's all included, but
Yeah.
really it's our bond resolution that
Okay,
is
this
covering
will
the
not
town.
increase the town's commitment to provide town funding. It's included in,
Right, because the
but-
bond resolution is considered town
Yeah,
funding.
and
I
that's
thought
already in
the
place.
two grants were to be totally separate in terms of paperwork and administration.
They are.
Now they're tied together.
Just in that respect, they are.
Well, it's a pretty big respect. They are tied together.
Oh, you wanna call it that?
What do you mean, if I want to call it that? I mean, they are tied together. One is going to be conditioned on the other one going forward.
Your big question is it gonna cost the town any more money than has already been?
That's ultimately, yeah, there's
And the
already,
answer to that is no.
But we have to expend, is it an expenditure or just that we bonded it, or that we agreed to bond it?
The town has already approved the bond resolution.
Correct.
I think if the town doesn't vote to go forward with the first phase
Yeah.
of this sidewalk project,
There's no bond,
well, there's not gonna be any phase two.
right?
Right.
So the TAP grant, I can't imagine we'd get it. if we
So,
had to go ahead
just to be
with phase
clear,
one.
when this was presented to COG, was it presented as a phase two? I see.
Definitely. I showed them phase one first.
All right, let's get to
Let's say
phase one.
Phase two is.
Let's get to phase
So
one. I
phase
think that's
one is
probably,
the real order of business here. Yes.
I'm wondering if there was any discussion about the timing of when you might know when you got the money or not, because I've sat through a number of streetscape committee meetings and they are not clear on when they might know.
Rick wasn't sure, but he felt sooner rather than later. That's not really much of an answer, but this is money that the COG has been sitting on now for a while, and it needs to get distributed. The deadline for submissions was the end of September, which we met. And
But is it COG that makes the decision or is it a federal agency?
it's a federal decision, but it runs through the COG. It almost replaces, since we don't have county government, the COGs in many respects replace county governments here in Connecticut, and for the purposes of grants like this, it does.
So who makes the decision?
The feds. It's either the feds or the Connecticut DOT, even though it's not their money. For example, we did Rick did a large bridge project on Carter Road a couple of years ago, and that was federal money, but it was administered by the Connecticut DOT. I think it might be the same thing in this case. We were in such a hurry to get it in under the deadline. Those aren't small details, but they're details that we hadn't really, at least I hadn't given a lot of thought to. Catherine?
Bruce, you implied that the federal grant would be for parts that are not necessarily included in the streetscape proposal. If we don't get the federal grant, are there any parts of the streetscape proposal that will be impacted?
I'm gonna let John touch on that.
Okay.
well, I just have a sort of a tie-in to that question. If indeed, so if I understand this correctly, COG is the gatekeeper, if you will, to $3 million.
Two COGs, but yes.
Okay, the $3 million of which potentially we could get half.
Some of. Or maybe.
There are two, did you say two?
We don't know how much the other COG, if they've come up with any projects.
Okay, okay.
Maybe
So,
two, maybe three or four.
so was there any consideration given from the Streetscape Committee and your input on it to take that money as the primary money to go forward with the project that we're looking at?
You can't. There were
Because-
restrictions on that TAP grant, it had to be for new construction. And they don't consider replacing sidewalks new construction.
But everything east of the light and south of the light would be considered new.
That's correct.
Right.
So this is
So
all,
it would only do little pieces.
So it is only for new construction.
they will not fund replacement of.
And what is TAP an acronym for?
Transportation Action Program?
Okay.
Something like that.
New construction, that's a bit odd.
They will only fund new.
Okay.
And Rick Lynn thought that what we have south and east of the monument is not standards of
It's not a
sidewalks.
sidewalk, yeah.
Right, they're paths. So he thought that they would qualify for that grant.
Got it. Thank you.
So I think you formed this committee in early June, early to mid-June. Just getting organized, interruptions with vacations, getting our morning and meeting straight, that sort of thing took about 45 days. You'd asked for a report in 60 days, and we were just getting started in 60 days. But over the last 2 months, we've met, I think, probably 6 or 7 times at least, and have produced our recommendations. There's very little, I would say, very little unanimity on these recommendations. We have 5 people who are independent and thoughtful and have differing opinions. And the 4-to-1, the 3-to-2 votes didn't always include the same 4 and 1 and the same 3 and 2. So I think I'm happy to present this. But again, I want to emphasize that I think there's very little that we were unanimous about. See, I think that does it. I have packets, and really the only important thing is the first page and a half. The rest is just some supporting documents. And it's fairly big type, big spaces between paragraphs. So I think we can go through it fairly quickly. Our recommendations, for the first one, number 1, is probably the biggest. A lot of debate over whether to recommend all concrete, all asphalt. For quite a while, the commission was going the committee was going in the direction of concrete north of the monument, maybe asphalt the other places. All unanimity on granite curbs. There was no real discussion about any alternatives there, but whether to use concrete or asphalt for the sidewalks themselves. One of the arguments of the first committee and the Architectural Review Board, which I'll get to later, was for a unifying look throughout the village center. And that's where we ended up. So the recommendation is to solicit bids for concrete sidewalks and bid with alternates for asphalt. And a decision maker there. In one sense, that's kicking the can down the road, but there was a lot of thought that it really should be up to, it should be available for consideration and a vote of the town, before selecting the town, however it comes out. But it could be based on actual bids rather than estimates. Okay? The second recommendation, and the second page has diagrams for this, and Wes Wyrick did a lot of diagrams, a lot of work on these things, was north of the monument, to North Main Street, to have an edging next to the street curb of flat cobblestones or some similar stone material that would encompass the utility poles, the guy wires, the street signs, that would likely just create breaks in whatever the sidewalk material would be. So there's some drawings of on the next page of what that could look like.
And that wouldn't really be, people obviously would walk in there to some extent, but they wouldn't walk in there much because there would be all those things in the way.
Right. And the idea would be that it would be a flat surface, not stamped concrete, not rounded cobblestone, something that would be safe for people to
But would be
enter and exit
visually
their
a little
cars.
different.
Right, yeah.
I'm just sort of visualizing and trying to see, but there are places where the pole's almost in the middle of the sidewalk. How's that work?
Not so much on Main Street.
Not on Main Street?
North Main, yeah.
Okay,
Details,
all right, just,
yeah,
I
details
don't mean to
need
get
to
into the
right,
weeds, I
yeah.
just,
One of the strongest public comments we had was that the new ADA ramps at the crosswalks are concrete and are very slick in the winter. So I don't think we're gonna tear those out, they have to be at crosswalks. So we wanted to ask the engineers to come up with solutions for that, maybe some resurfacing, something to make them more safe.
why are they slick? Why would they be slick if that's what they put in?
I think they could have had more brushing in the surface, but Water collects there also, and, you know, part of it is just natural drainage.
Okay.
But we'd like to have the engineers take a look at that and recommend things. And we decided to recommend requesting 2 new crosswalks from DOT. One in the vicinity of Templeton Farms on Maple Street, and one in the vicinity of the Pfeiffer Room and the Kent Green on North Main. And we say vicinity several times here because it's really up to negotiations with the state. And final say is the state. We broke it out into 2 phases, but I want to emphasize that the recommendation is if we don't get TAP funding, or even if we do get TAP funding, that it all be considered one project just in terms of timing and doing it. And this was not a unanimous decision again. But the vote was that it should be considered one project done not necessarily in one calendar year, but done continuously, rather than breaking it up into doing part now, waiting for more grants or something, doing part in another year or 2 years or 3 years. So phase 1, just to break it out separate from what might be TAP funding, almost the same as the first committee. On North Main Street, from the monument to the north exit of the Kent Green on the east side. This committee decided not to recommend going all the way up to the community house. We didn't get any public comment in favor of that. That sidewalk is in decent shape, and no place to stop. North Main Street, from the monument to, again, the vicinity of the Fife and Drum building on the west side. Again, part of that depending on negotiations with the property owner. They don't need it to extend, maybe don't want it to extend all the way to the parking lot, but that might depend again on where a crosswalk could be negotiated with the state. On Bridge Street, from the monument to Elizabeth Street on the north side, from the monument to the Housatonic River Bridge on the south side. Then phase 2, which again we recommend being concurrent, unless, but considered separate if there's TAP funding. And again, whenever an engineering firm is hired, they're estimating 5 to 6 months to do all the negotiations, talk with the state, come back to the town, draw up the final drawings, the bid package, and go out to bid. They're estimating 5 to 6 months. So if the engineers were hired now, we're still looking at well into the spring to get bids. So I think that's probably plenty of time to find out whether the TAP funding is going to come through or not, and whether they really need to split it out into 2 packages.
So just to be clear, phase 2 is all new construction that you believe would qualify for the TAP funding?
Yes.
No. Yes.
Well, phase 2 on the back, okay.
No.
It's separate than phase 2 on the front, first page.
Because from the monument down to Kent Greenhouse, there is existing sidewalk. So that would
But
not,
they're not, they don't qualify as.
They're generally believed not to be.
from the monument down, so if you go down towards Tobin's garage, that's not a viable sidewalk?
I'd say
Wow, we could throw everything in.
most of it is driveway. What little sidewalk there is,
Well, right at Old Belgique, there's a sidewalk,
Yeah.
all the way down.
Questionable on the sidewalks as to their
Is-
liability of a real sidewalk.
And who, I know Rick Lynn weighed in, but is there somebody from some authority that would be able to give us a
Yeah.
perspective on that?
Yes.
I don't know who will make final decisions or will inspect that.
One other question on the funding, there was, one thing for Barbara, is there an extension needed on one of the grants? Is that in place, and are we going to?
There is an extension needed, no, it's not in place. I've been waiting to submit the extension request till we found out where we were with this first phase.
She's been working on this extension request for a couple of months.
Well, it's been sitting on my desk for a couple months, I can't work on it really
You've
until,
done the work that you can do.
yeah,
at this
I've
point.
done some work on it, yes.
Yes, it doesn't need to be reviewed.
So if we don't get TAP funding, from South Main Street, from the monument south, again, from the monument, and you never figured out how to term this, as far as that asphalt path goes now, which is the last gravel driveway above the Kent Greenhouse, somewhere right in that area.
Carly's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carly's building.
On the Maple Street, same as the first committee, from the monument to Maple Street Extension on the north side, from the monument to the fire department, the first driveway in the fire department on the south side. That's our recommendation for this scope.
So phase one and phase two, if you're doing phase one, is the theory that that's, let me ask, you walked all the sidewalks? Pretty much, you walked all the sidewalks and you did an assessment?
Yes.
And is that assessment in your thinking for phase one versus phase two? Or is it that there is because North Main Street tends to be the sort of the thick of downtown, and that's the priority?
I can't speak for the whole committee. We never really discussed it that way, I would say. I think the consensus, certainly my approach, again, is the unifying aspect of the entire village district. Certainly, especially the businesses. But, you know, on Main Street, on Bridge Street and Maple Street, that the sidewalks would unify all of that and provide a look for the village center of Kent. I'm not sure,
Well, I guess one would think that, yes, you would always make it as uniform as possible, even if you did it over time. But I guess where I'm trying to bridge the gap is you want to include everything as one phase, if indeed we don't get the tap.
right.
And I was just wondering, what was the genesis that made one, project 2, aside from new sidewalks?
Just the possibility of tap funding.
Just the
It just seemed to, because with the tap funding, we're discussing what is phase two on the front here.
Yeah.
We just wrote it up this way. I wrote it up this way, I would say, yeah. But the motion, again, I don't think it was unanimous, was to consider that all as one project to be done at one time if there's no tap funding. And that's the only reason we separated out phase one, phase two.
And that's with the proviso that we have sufficient funds in hand, whether it be grant money or money authorized by town vote to do it.
I think there's always been a question where would the estimates come in, you know, when we go out to bid. The engineers, the numbers we have from the engineers are a little over a year old now. 14, 15 months old, I think. But they looked at them for us this summer and said that they think those numbers are still good.
Actually, I'm sorry, and that means for both phases together?
Yes.
Because that's really the key. So theoretically, if we, what did we bond for? 2.9? And we have another grants and such, $1 million, right? So theoretically, if we do get that, we don't need to spend that whole first phase, second phase, if you will.
If we get the tap funding?
Yeah.
I agree, yes.
So-
I would think it would cut down on what we need to spend, although it may be needed, it may need to be used as matching funds for tap. I don't know.
Depends on where that second, what did you actually apply for from TAP? Do you know, dollar wise?
I don't think we put an amount in.
You didn't? You have to.
Yeah, it was,
You have to.
estimates like 1.8.
I was gonna say 1.5 maybe.
So just along that line, if indeed the expectation is phase one and phase two could be handled by the $4 million, is that the right number? Well, no, $3.9 million, thank you, roughly.
Yes.
Roughly $4 million. Then either we luck out by getting more funding for phase two and not have to expend as much,
That's the hope.
or, okay, well, that's exciting.
And Mike Obel and Jack Nelson, there was a lot of question about the numbers and even some skepticism, so they spent some time looking at the numbers that Malone and McBurn had given us. We didn't include to the community house, right?
North of the green.
Did not include that.
Right.
But they put together their own set of numbers, relying somewhat on Malone McBroom, looking at current prices for asphalt, for concrete, and came up pretty much in the same ballpark as Malone McBroom.
But
So we think those numbers are pretty good.
we used all of their numbers, just had to combine them to do the phase one and subtract the 40% of partial, what was phase three, I believe, of the, or section three of the Malone and the group. We changed two of the line item numbers. We took an average of the 5 bidders down in Brookfield, but there were only 2 sections there that we felt were compatible to our project.
Right.
We didn't feel their concrete prices were compatible because they have way fewer obstructions. The driveway repair is basically driveway repair, so we used their average there. And we used their average granite curbing, which is generally similar to what, so those 2 went up according to, they went up significantly from Malone and Brew's numbers. Anything else, we couldn't get, everybody's too busy to give you square foot numbers
Right.
on a project that might happen next spring. You know, no, they just don't have the time to deal with giving you the numbers, so we couldn't come up with contractor numbers for much of that.
That's the kind of info you seek during the winter, I guess, huh?
So pretty much.
So,
But they put some time in, that I think reinforces the idea that
around it.
we're in the ballpark.
all right, so, again, if what you're recommending here goes to the town, it's this project for the amount that's been bonded and has been secured by grants.
I'll let you decide how you present it. No, and I'm not trying to be cute.
I think it's very important because what you're saying to the town is, hey, there's an opportunity for us to get another grant here. But if we don't get that grant, you're on the hook for 3.9.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So, I think that's what's critical, is to make sure, when do we know, can we know whether that is secured?
I'll try to find out tomorrow, but I was told it would not be a long wait, but I don't know what that means. That's the best I can tell.
Right?
Basically, you brought up another question that I think needs to be answered, is the cap grant is a separate thing, you were advised to keep it separate because it's a federal thing, et cetera, et cetera. It shouldn't be a part of this. This is just coming from today, what I've heard today.
Yeah, until we get clarity on whether we are awarded.
I mean, if they get word that we've already appropriated funding and that we've gone ahead and said, and recommended that we do this whole project, why would they give us that grant money?
I mean, that's a good point.
That's an interesting point.
This is just, came up just today, so
That's an interesting point.
I don't need to
know if that
change what the committee had decided, but to me, that raises a big question. Why would we include that if indeed we don't want it to be part of it when applying for this cap grant? I don't mean
Mike,
to
that's a
throw
great point.
I don't mean to throw a thorn in here, but it was just thrown in as far as I can see.
John, on the summary here, can I just make sure that this, there's a summary that shows concrete sidewalks and granite curbs, and a second asphalt sidewalks and granite curbs. Those are the 2 alternative, your recommendations, that we submit for proposals for 2 separate bids.
Right.
And the total on the concrete and granite curbs is 3.2. Is that an all-in number, and we've kind of appropriated for 3.9? So that's the same number we're talking about, so it's under the 3.9, or is there more money supplied?
We just got this last night, and we voted to give it to you with the proviso that it's I don't remember the terminology we used, it's preliminary, but I'll let Mike answer that, if he can.
These numbers, again, were taken for the most part from Malone and Boone's numbers, which are more than a year old.
But, so really my question is that 3.2, the number that
seems to us to be as close as we can get without having actual bids.
Understood, I'm
What
not
it-
questioning
what
the
it-
accuracy.
Okay, and what these numbers do represent also is the removal of, I believe, $250,000 worth of lighting that we are not recommending to do.
Removal of what?
Lighting.
Street lighting. I believe it was about $250,000. That's removed from the project because the lighting's just too expensive. We have street lighting on the telephone poles and they're not gonna go away anytime soon, so it didn't make sense.
Does it remove the conduits as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we're not recommending that. If we were burying wires, all the wires, then planning for underground optic fiber or something made sense. But with all of the wires that are gonna remain above ground, one more optic fiber wire didn't seem to.
So it doesn't include the conduits for possible future lighting?
No, correct, we're not recommending that, correct. I thought the important thing on the spreadsheet was the very last page, which gives a rough breakdown of the cost per year of over a 20-year lifetime for asphalt, sidewalks, a 30-year lifetime for concrete. And this is concrete and the base, asphalt and the base. Would the base vary between those two materials?
Base would vary, but
Yeah.
we still, in one of the group's numbers, we're assuming that a new base is included. We asked where, and we didn't get an answer where it's included.
Yeah, didn't he say when he was here that it was included, but it didn't show, wasn't broken out?
He said it was included, but I asked him where it's included, he couldn't answer. So the base would be the same on either product.
Yeah.
But this is just the life, the breakdown of the cost per year of the concrete versus the asphalt, not the curbing, not the base, simply the concrete versus the asphalt, given the numbers we had over the.
So, the thought was that that's information that the town would want to know. It'll break down per year between the two materials. Okay. Let's take a quick look back at phase 2 if we have TAP funding. The real change there would be adding Lane Street, recommending a sidewalk on one side of Lane Street, and the other would be to run the sidewalk all the way out to Stewart Farms on Maple Street extension. And again, with the preliminary numbers from the engineers, I forget what the total was, but, and if the funding's not there, it's not there. But those are the two big differences between TAP funding or no TAP funding.
Well, I think that's an appropriate breakdown, but Mike did raise the question, how do we present this in a way that we don't obliterate our possibility of getting the TAP funding, but still move forward with, the town acceptance of the project? That's not obvious to me how we do that.
Well, an obvious solution would be to do one chunk and then apply for the TAP grant, or apply for other grants.
We're already applying for the TAP grant. I think it's easy for the engineers to break this out into two phases. But the committee recommendation, and again, it's not unanimous, the committee recommendation was to get it all done.
At one. Well, under one umbrella.
Right. They would have to be administered separately, the engineers can do it separately. And then, by the time we know whether the TAP funding is available or not, they'll know whether to do the engineering out to Stewart Farms and for Lane Street or not. Again, they're looking at a 5 to 6 month timetable. So I don't think it's really a problem. I think we all can agree that most of the time, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing anyway. But they can draw it up as separate projects. For our purposes, the recommendation is that it should all get done.
Bruce, historically on COG, have you run across these TAP grants before?
They've been brought up before, but nobody, according to Rick Lynn, very few people have ever applied for them because they require a bigger project than people have. So no, this is the first time that I've been personally involved.
But would they come up every year or two or three?
They come up. I don't know how often I can find that out.
I mean,
But like I said, it's federal money that runs through the
additional,
in office then, that I would not be in favor of asking the town for any more money than they've already authorized.
Well, wouldn't it be part of the money that they have already authorized?
Yeah,
So-
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
Well,
not the town.
more streets.
no, not the town. Well, if we're allocating $3.9 million for this whole thing, and now, but then we're saying we also have $1.5 million to do the bottom part, that's a lot more money than having to do the whole thing. So I guess to Mike's point, and it raises the question, is there a way we can do one phase? I know it's not a unanimous recommendation, but one phase so we know we got it down, know whatever you choose, whatever's chosen is going to be used elsewhere, but then go out and tap other money.
I don't know what that does to the 2.9 that was voted on for bonding.
We'll get
Nothing.
up to, right?
Up
You don't have to, you don't have to bond the whole
and
thing.
you don't have to bond it all at the same time either.
Okay.
It's authorized.
Good.
You can do it.
That's curious, you don't have to do it all at the same time
No, but it's pretty costly to
if you,
have separate
Yeah, to
issues, but
rewrite
it
it.
depends, if you end up going through USDA,
Mhm.
it's a different process than if you go straight to a bond.
Ted, you have a question?
Yeah, just one, could tap money also be used if you wanted to, do the lighting? Since that would be
Have
considered
to
new
look, I don't
construction.
know if that's included.
Well, the application's already been submitted,
Would have to be a
So-
separate grant, because the
That's what I'm
application has
saying.
been
Okay.
submitted.
Do you have congressional support for the TAP award? I mean, is somebody backing this somewhere?
We don't, but I'm sure they
well, we
Yeah, I
have
mean,
the
that's-
COG, you've got the COG
did. COG is
support.
definitely supportive.
But I mean, the congressperson,
Mm,
somebody in Washington with strings.
I don't know how impactful that would be, but certainly worth considering.
well, it sounds to me like this tap thing threw a monkey wrench in, but the way Chris was kind of outlining it, we have certain money that, to a limit of, whatever the bonding authorization was. And we could present this as phase one, and we have this amount of money that if we only pay for phase one and TAP comes through, we won't spend nearly that much money. The TAP will contribute to phase two. If TAP doesn't come through, then we continue on with phase two. And again, the engineers can be working on both simultaneously. So I think this sort of knits together.
Yeah, sort of.
Well, and picking up on what Barbara said, if you say these two phases are roughly $4 million, so $2 million each, couldn't we bond 4 million or 3.9 and then start the project, and then if
The way it works is you take out a bond anticipation note, so whatever your first phase of the project is, we take out a bond anticipation note. So sometime during that process of when you start construction to by the time you're ready to either take out another bond anticipation note or actually go to bond, you'll know whether you've got that TAP money, and you'll be able to put together the project in a way that's reasonable so that it all coalesces together at the
Right.
end. It doesn't all have to have all the answers on day one for that piece of it.
Right, but again, if you have $4 million and two and two for simple math, and you get that TAP fund, we're only spending $2 million, again, depending on how much the TAP money is, $2 million plus. So, to me, there would be a monetary argument for, and I know you can't do everything at once, there's no way possible you're gonna rip this whole town up
No.
at one time. But I think if you start with the premise that we take, and this is where I was most interested in your assessment, if you take the downtown and know that that's your priority and start that, then you get everything else rolling. And hopefully it all coalesces and,
Again, it was not unanimous, but my strong feeling, and the feeling of the first committee and the architectural review board letter is there, is that it's important to have that unifying aspect to the village center. I'm really concerned that if we do just North Main Street and Bridge Street, that something happens and the next part, phase two, let's call it, doesn't happen for 3 years, 5 years, whatever. It needs a new committee and a whole new process under new selectmen, new board of finance, the whole bit.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe we keep a standing committee to keep these, I mean, to me, well, it'll probably be a shock to many, I believe in the sidewalk program. I just don't believe that we have to do it all at once, one. But two, I'm also, you know, I've seen enough over time that we seem to get these grants, we seem to open ourselves up, and if we can time it and work it right, whether it's right now or later, I think it makes sense to do that, but.
I look at it, I think more from the planning point of view.
Right.
That you have a plan and I'd rather implement the total plan, but that's why I'm not on the Board of Finance.
Yeah, I don't think it's always money. I mean, you know, you talk about continuity. Is there continuity right now in town?
Village Center has a look, it's kind of run down old asphalt, but there is a look, no, and I'm serious. There is, you take a look, that's what the sidewalks are, and I'm against having concrete in some places, asphalt in other places, because again, that breaks it up and makes some kind of visual judgment of differences in the business areas that I don't think are warranted. So actually, I do think there is a look now, I've thought about that question. It's just pretty old, it's run down, yeah.
Well, look, I'd like to state that I appreciate the committee's work, and I think the recommendations are sound. And I can appreciate your frequent reference to a lack of unanimity. So at least I got some confidence that it wasn't just you guys rubber stamping one idea and moving forward. So thank you for that, and thank you to the committee members. There was a lot going on to get here, and I'm pretty comfortable that this is what we go forward with.
Mike, last comment?
Last comment, okay.
No, a last comment.
Yes, this is the last thing I'm gonna say on this whole subject. I'm real tired of it. I've been asked by several people, both in meetings and out of meetings, why I'm so adamant that we don't use concrete. I'm not here to go against what the committee, but a vote's a vote. The committee submitted what it's going to. Most of you know that I've been excavating for 40 some odd years. I've been pouring concrete as well for over 30 years. I've fallen through concrete, I've had concrete fall on me, I've slept in it, I've drank it, I've eaten it, picked it out of my eyes, I've slipped and fallen on it. My point with concrete is, its nature is to crack. It freezes quickly. The one time I did fall on it, it was within a 20-minute period. I walked in a building, it was freezing, I walked out, it had misted, the sidewalk was frozen solid, and I went on my back. That's my experience. I came to this committee because I want the sidewalks. The town needs new sidewalks. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's why I'm here. But I'm also here to give you 40-plus years of experience. And Jack Nelson also has 40-plus years of experience. The two guys that voted nay the most. And I just want the committee to understand that having dealt with concrete for so many years and having worked with it and have concrete shrinks, concrete therefore cracks, concrete therefore shifts along with the frost. Blacktop will stretch and expand a little bit better. Blacktop. When it's new, it looks beautiful just like new concrete looks. I've got pictures of a 4-year-old concrete sidewalk in Great Barrington that doesn't look quite so nice. Never showed it to anybody, but I just got the picture the other day. It always cracks. There's been a discussion about heels and sinking into the blacktop. I'll believe that when I see it. But concrete has control joints every 15, 16 to 20 feet. It has control cuts every 4 feet. If you wanna talk about heels and heels sinking into sidewalks, go there. Look out here where the expansion joint is gone, and now you have that hole that's a ½ inch thick. It's concrete because of the expansion joint, you have to have it. I've stuck to my guns on it, I'm going to continue to stick to my guns on it. I just think that it should be considered extremely seriously. And, you know, the three things that I thought the committee was made to do were our scope, our charge, safety number one, cost number two, which the costs are there, and aesthetics number three. They both look nice when they're new. Nobody can deny that. Some people just like concrete more. And when asked about why I think I'm right over so many engineers, my own experience, that's all I can give you. And I have another theory, but nobody really wants to hear that. But I can't consider myself so naive that money might not be part of it. And with that, I think everyone's heard my
The
thoughts.
proposal is to solicit parallel bids for concrete and asphalt on the sidewalks.
Yes.
And
And I think that it should go to a vote that way, too. I don't think that it should be put to, I don't think that if it goes to a vote to the town, I don't think it should be given to them as one product. I think they should have the choice.
Yeah, the per year cost was interesting.
That was based on a 30-year lifespan for concrete.
Which is what Mike Dougherty told us when he came to our meeting. He said roughly 20 years blacktop, roughly 30 years concrete. So we took his years, his numbers, and there's the math. 75% more from the concrete.
But that number includes the base also, so.
No, it does not.
I'm not.
Oh.
It says.
Malone and McGrew?
Yeah, it says concrete concrete base for total all phases. And
Well, that's what we're assuming.
same thing with base.
That's what we were assuming, because we couldn't find it anywhere else.
My last word will be that I thought I voted no more than anyone else. We had good discussion.
That's what it's about.
With that, I'm gonna leave, thank you guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mike, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Wes?
So where do we stand now with this?
I might suggest a little bit of time, not now, but a little bit of time to digest and study and schedule a special meeting if you like.
Okay, we can certainly do that. The question, the bigger question he says is where do we go from this, and let's walk through what the next steps are going to be here. We then need to put something in front of the voters, right? Isn't that what our goal was?
At some point, yeah.
Well, with the time ticking on the money, it should be as soon as possible, right?
Well, I would say yes, just because that would give one more piece of ammunition for Barbara to put into a letter of requesting an extension. I mean, we're not gonna have any work started by December 31st.
Clearly, but work can't start until we act. So, and I guess the question is, there are going to be clearly two bids, but is that bid process going to happen once we have hired? Is that the process? Are we gonna have that concrete versus?
The bid would be the last thing.
You don't have a plan to go with yet.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
You don't have a plan or anything to bid off of yet until the engineers do it.
The hard and fast numbers would not come until the very end, yeah.
Right, I guess I'm talking about just the political component of it, of when does the polis decide one versus the other? And maybe we don't, maybe we decide well after when the numbers come in and we can have that fight even though we know we're doing the project.
I would think that makes sense.
Does that mean?
Because,
I mean, the scope of the project will be defined. I mean, it's
Right.
phase one and phase two.
Yeah.
But within that separation, it's gonna be defined, just a question of the surface of the sidewalk.
Correct.
I would think
So I think we can go,
We can
take the
take it
next step to the engineering phase and get ready to present it to the town without a definition to that answer. And then ultimately, that's the question of the cost, once we pin it down, then that goes to the town. So I don't see any reason why the phase one, phase two can't be pushed, essentially right now. Maybe we should digest it for a couple of days, but not much longer.
I think we need to take it to the town and get approval to do a project before we bother hiring the engineers, because
I agree.
you gotta have 4 or 5 months of engineering, then we don't have the money to pay the engineers now anyway.
Well, we
So you
have a
go to
portion
town.
of it, but,
You only got what's left of the 100,000.
right. And they had a little timeline with they had dollar amounts associated with it, and I don't have it in front of me, but
So
3 or
we could
4
go to
months
the
into
town.
their work process.
We could go to the town with the definition of phase one and phase two, essentially right now. And we need some materials to be presented, so.
You have estimates now, so when you go to town, you can tell them, estimate for
Yeah.
granite and concrete is this much, for blacktop is this much. What are we gonna do?
Or we say, this is the project, phase one and phase two. We need to say this is what they want to do, and if so, then we have the money to go ahead and do it. But with the promise that we will work as hard as possible to get this TAP grant, so that phase one and phase two is less money ultimately for them. That track?
Yeah, no, I don't agree that the initial presentation to the town should ask for guidance on whether to do concrete or asphalt. It gets presented, here's the scope of the project, phase one does these areas, phase two does these areas. That's the project we want to go forward with. There's some materials issues to be resolved later, and it's all within the cost parameters of the original bonding discussion.
So the response to the person who sits in the audience, and I agree with you, what you just said, but the person who sits in the audience says, well, okay, fine, I like that, the areas you've talked about putting sidewalks into, what are the materials?
It's either gonna be concrete or asphalt.
And the bids are going to be,
And we're
we're
gonna
gonna
get
request
2
bids
bids.
for 2.
And I would expect that anyone bidding on the job can fairly readily break it out, and there's 2 numbers. And the only difference is, what the final preparation is. So I don't think it's unreasonable to go out to bid requesting two bids.
I would think so, I've not done that. That's true.
But I think it's at a point that it can go to the town. This is a definition of the sidewalk area that's being redone, phase one and phase two.
I would agree.
Okay, let's move on and figure out when we want to meet.
Pick a town meeting day.
While you're doing that, I just want to say that I want to, and I think other people join me, publicly commend Bruce for his involvement in this project from day one. Attended every single 8 o'clock meeting during Streetscape 1's deliberations, and I think the meetings of Streetscape 2. And I know that both candidates for first selectman are here, and I hope that whichever of them is successful will demonstrate an equal commitment to this project. Thank you, Bruce.
Appreciate it. So you're talking about a meeting of us?
I agree with Jeff, that we need to put this on a faster track
Okay,
than.
Jeff, what's your schedule request?
I would suggest we do it this week. One of those applications that I was out of the country might come true. So this week I'm available almost any time.
Wednesday I'm not, but Thursday, Friday. Tomorrow's Wednesday, right?
Can't do tomorrow anyway.
Right.
I can't morning.
Why don't we say Friday? Does that work for you?
Yes, Friday's good.
What time do you want to do it?
Afternoon, early afternoon or late, I don't care, I have something in the morning.
Good afternoon, 1 o'clock.
Oh, let me point out that our last recommendation was that the Board of Selectmen appoint another committee to look at things like Elizabeth Street or any other areas in town. There was some public comment at the end of Streetscape 1 about Elizabeth Street. And we're happy to pass that buck along.
Yeah, I guess that's part of my concern is, especially with the thought of continuity, that I'm sorry that this town has not, in the last 20 years, focused on our sidewalks. I don't know why we missed the boat, but we did, we all missed the boat. And I think we're scrambling, and we all have millions of different ideas as to how and why, but continuity with respect to material might also transfer to people who actually know what they're doing. So I hope you guys could at least keep that in consideration. All right, so I've got Friday the...
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Friday 1.
But since I'm doing the warning, I'm not sure what am I warning on Friday? What are you doing? I understand that, but I need to know what exactly you're doing.
I think we have to bring this to the town, so
Just to schedule a
make a
town
motion
meeting.
we're gonna have to make a motion
Okay, so it's for the
for
town.
to
That's-
bring
okay.
the
Thank you, sorry. I-
development of the sidewalks.
Further study and potential action on.
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
Keep it vague, specific enough,
Okay,
fulfill the requirements.
okay.
Okay. Do we have anything on the policy procedure manual that we need?
We do.
General policies?
Yes.
Oh, that, okay.
This a long time ago was attached to the policy and procedure manual, and it somehow has gotten omitted and is no longer attached. And there's a very,
Everybody looking at
and there's a very,
On the floor in your office?
yeah. And so it needs to be gone through, because there's some items in here that probably need a little bit of updating, particularly in the bids and proposals section, page 4 of the document.
Bids and proposals, yes, I saw that. And the insurance, is that low? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah,
Didn't that, it seems low to me.
yeah.
I mean, bodily injury, $100,000.
On page 4, the biggest issue is that since the creation of this particular policy, we have implemented other sources that we go to, things like the state bid list. So if something's on the state bid list, we don't necessarily send out RFPs, assuming that the state has already done that, and that's how it got the lowest bid. So there's other things that we would like to incorporate in this policy, so it needs to be reviewed. And the $10,000 limit is pretty low, and, that's something else that needs to be kind of looked at.
Okay.
Can that be the subject, a second item on this meeting we're gonna have on Friday? Is that too soon for that?
Well, I guess I need some guidance from Joyce as to what
We
we're
can-
currently doing in the bidding process that needs to be clarified. I mean, that's just a drafting issue to make sure it
Correct.
reflects what we're doing, and you think it'll be what we're doing going forward.
Right.
In terms of vehicles and insurance,
And do we really need to do anything with vehicles, Joyce?
Yeah, everybody drives their own personal vehicle for work. Every time you go to a COG meeting, every time we go to anything, we're driving our own vehicles
And
on
so
town
what-
time. So if we have an accident on town time,
Okay.
there's question as to,
Yeah, so are these consistent with, I guess, these numbers to me, they jumped out at me as very low. So are there
We'll
any
need to-
standards that the other towns use? Is there anything we can go off of as a recommendation?
I'm sure I can do some more research. We
Yeah,
just dug this
let's-
up as,
Which number is that about, the goods one?
The bodily injury, $300,000.
Yeah.
$100,000 won't get you a foot.
Exactly, that's what I'm
Just
saying,
nothing.
this particular section of the manual has gotten omited and hasn't been updated as along
Since
with,
14.
yeah.
All right,
So we need to look at all of that.
So doing it on Friday would be too soon.
Well, we
Maybe,
could put it on the agenda, and if we're not ready, we defer.
I make a recommendation that between you and Joyce, you can sit down, and just make some notes as to what you guys think are, there's best practice policies for this, and then,
For pages 2 through 4.
yep, and then make sure that's updated. That said, any other holes we'll have in the policy with respect to dated might have to be looked at as well.
And I
And
can,
this,
I can gather information if you give me specifics that you're seeking.
when you had talked about putting the state policy for fingerprinting, like this is the section where it would go.
Yes.
This is the kind of thing that would go in that, so Jeff, you and I can send you that electronically and we can.
Yes, that would work.
Thank you, Joyce.
Okay, so that's second item for the agenda.
Yep.
Okay, moving quickly through the remainder of the agenda, I hope my report is in your packet and also.
Is this your last report?
No.
One more?
One more.
Report?
Make it a good one.
Yeah, I'll try. Put a few jokes in and stuff. I don't know if there's anything in here that needs special mention. This is 2 months' worth, August and September. Some of which I've mentioned already this evening. Okay.
Yep, all right. Thank you.
Guys have anything you want to report?
No.
Okay. Barbara's report is attached.
Yep, and the only correction I want to make is under expense, where I said previously this was a responsibility of KCS.
Got
That
it.
should be Kent School.
In school, yeah.
There's been 3 students coming to Kent Center School that are paying tuition that we've received money for.
And then they reduced their tuition dramatically, what
Yeah,
they go
it's
to.
like 2,250, I think.
For a second, wasn't it? I thought,
Excuse me?
my understanding was it was $4,500 for first student, and then if you had a sibling, you were $2,250.
No, I've only gotten 3
I
checks.
won't.
No, you're gonna get it in 2 installments, sorry. I should
Oh, it's
say.
2
Well,
installments.
thank you. I didn't know, it didn't say that on the checks, it just says.
Yeah, but it's a 2 installment.
Okay.
But it is $4,500, isn't
For
it?
the first, and,
For the first.
and you're right, there's a
Oh, I
sibling
never
discount.
got it.
Okay.
And it wasn't a reduction, it was a setting of the, we didn't have one.
Yeah, there was just a policy setting.
We didn't reduce it because there wasn't anything to reduce.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Tax refunds.
There's 25 tax refunds there, they're all except one very small. Debbie did point out, that
One large one for 17.
Yeah, let me just see it for a second. Yeah, this,
The first one on top.
yeah, it's a sale of yours, that's what she pointed out,
Oh, great.
right?
Well, then I'll abstain from that one. So we're just looking at this total here? Yeah, there it is, right there.
That's the total.
Probably on that money machine tape.
Huh? Oh, yeah, that's even better. Hey, look, they're the same.
But other, the rest are all cars.
Motion to accept?